Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Recha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of First Maccabees, the 6th chapter. About that time, King Antiochus, traveling through the high countries, heard say that Elamaeus in the country of Persia, I think that's Elam, when you look that up, was a city greatly renowned for riches, silver and gold. So basically, Antiochus is like, look, he's spent a lot of his money, and he needs some more tribute money. So he's like, look, I'm gonna go out here, that over there in Persia, they got a lot of riches and gold. So let me go up in there, and go get a few things, to stock up the treasury. Unfortunately, things didn't go too well for him. It says, and that there was in it a very rich temple, wherein were coverings of gold and breastplates and shields, which Alexander, son of Philip, the Macedonian king, who reigned first among the Grecians, had left there. Because remember, he he had conquered all the way up to the Indus Valley. Okay, so he heard word that, oh shoot, while he was around that area in Persia, he left this, that, and the third over there. Let me go get that. Wherefore he came and sought to take the city and to spoil it, but he was not able, because they of the city, having had warning thereof, rose up against him in battle. So he fled and departed thence with great heaviness and returned to Babylon. So at this point, he tried to go and take it over. It didn't work out too well. He had to flee. He had to retreat. Now, I'm going to look up here because we're going to see him again. Lysias. Let's type me at first. Maccabees. And there's a bit of information on him that we can take a look at. All right, so it says here, the Seleucid Empire of the 2nd century BC was huge. It possessed 2 heartlands, the capital at Antioch in Syria, and a secondary capital at Babylon in Mesopotamia. Seleucid rulers had to aggressively remind their client rulers of their loyalty, lest the client rulers drift toward independence because their empire was so large, as happened with various subkingdoms over time. King Antiochus IV Epiphanes left Antioch around summer 165 BC, which is what we're reading about here, on an expedition to the eastern satrapies, which are like provinces. He would see to affairs in Babylonia, dismiss corrupt or overly independent officials, and attempt to exercise control over the drifting Persian provinces to what would become the Parthian Empire. Antiochus IV left Lysias in charge of the government of the western half of the empire as regent. Lysias also took guardianship of Antiochus' son, who continued to be raised in Antioch, which he named him Eupator, which means of a good father. Antiochus then went east with a loyal Greek army into Babylonia and Persia to collect the revenues which were not coming in satisfactorily. And that didn't end too well for him. Now I'm going to pause here. We'll come back and read some more on here. But just to continue on in 1 Maccabees 6. So he flees, right where we at. Verse 5 again. Moreover, there came one who brought... Oh, actually, no. Let's see. Verse 4. So when he went there, they rose up against him in battle. So he fled and departed thence with great heaviness and returned to Babylon. Moreover, so now you know why he came to Babylon, because you had remember the 2 main heartlands, right? One in Antioch in Syria, and then Babylon in Mesopotamia. Moreover, there came one who brought him tidings into Persia, that the armies which went against the land of Judea were put to flight, and that Lysias, who we were reading some information of him in the secular history, who went forth first with a great power, was driven away of the Jews, and that they were made strong by the armor and power and store of spoils, which they had gotten of the armies whom they had destroyed. So he's just hearing bad news. Damn. They defeated Lysias's army. They took the armor and the spoils and so on of the defeated, of the slain, and now they're using it to their advantage. Also, that they had pulled down the abomination which he had set up upon the altar of Jerusalem. Right, because remember, they rededicated the temple, cleansed it and everything. And that they had compassed about the sanctuary with high walls. So they built walls about it again to defend it, to keep it safe as before. And his city Bethsura, right, which he had basically taken over when he went to take over their land. Now when the king heard these words, he was astonished and sore moved, whereupon he laid him down upon his bed and fell sick for grief, because it had not befallen him as he looked for. So he wasn't feeling well. He got stressed onto sickness, as it says here, because basically nothing was going his way. And there he continued many days, for his grief was ever more and more, and he made account that he should die. So it got to the point where he was like, yo, I don't think I'm going to make it. And so it says, wherefore he called for all his friends and said unto them, the sleep is gone from mine eyes, and my heart faileth for very care. And I thought with myself, into what tribulation am I come? And how great a flood of miseries is it, wherein now I am. So he basically started reflecting back on his life and then how bad it is of a situation he found himself in now. For I was bountiful and beloved in my power. So basically he's saying, like, just a little while ago I had all this power, all these riches, I had everything. Verse 12, but now I remember the evils that I did at Jerusalem, and that I took all the vessels of gold and silver that were therein, and sent to destroy the inhabitants of Judea without a cause. I perceive therefore that for this cause these troubles are come upon me, and behold, I perish through great grief in a strange land. Then called he for Philip, one of his friends, who he made ruler over all his realm. So basically, now Lysias, remember, is still has dominion over the western part of the empire, and basically tutorship or tutelage of or the upbringing of the son of Antiochus Epiphanes. But now here he's basically appointing everything into the hand of Philip, one of his friends. And he gave him the crown and his robe and his signet, to the end he should bring up his son Antiochus and nourish him up for the kingdom. So basically he set him up kind of like a regent to say, you raise up my son, show him the right way. And once he's of age, then, basically set him up correctly. Okay. So Antiochus, or King Antiochus, died there in the 149th year. Now when Lysias knew that the king was dead, he set up Antiochus his son, whom he had brought up being young, to reign in his stead, and his name he called Eupator. So when he heard Antiochus was dead, he quickly, coronated Antiochus his son. Because now, like, being that he was watching over him and so on, he had power, and he could pretty much rule through Antiochus his son, right? About this time, they that were in the tower shut up the Israelites round about the sanctuary. So the stronghold that was in I think it was the city of David, those that were in there were basically preventing, right, as it says, the Israelites round about the sanctuary, and sought always their hurt and the strengthening of the heathen. So they would always, basically they were causing trouble and danger for the Israelites that were in Jerusalem. Wherefore Judas, purposing to destroy them, called all the people together to besiege them. So they came together and besieged them in the 150th year, and he made mounts for shot against them, and other engines, other war or siege weapons, right? Basically catapults and all these things, and anything else he saw necessary. Howbeit certain of them that were besieged got forth, unto whom some ungodly men of Israel joined themselves. So there were a few that were able to escape from the siege, and then you had wicked Israelites basically join in league with them. And they went unto the king and said, how long will it be ere thou execute judgment and avenge our brethren? So you had these wicked Israelites joining themselves to those that had escaped in that siege, and now having Lysias basically being a puppet master, right? With having set up Antiochus Eupator, the son of Epiphanes, on the throne. So that's who these Israelites, these wicked, ungodly men, went to go and complain about Judas. We have been willing to serve thy father, which is Epiphanes, and to do as he would have us, and to obey his commandments. For which cause they of our nation besiege the tower, and are alienated from us. Moreover, as many of us as they could light on, they slew and spoiled our inheritance. So he's saying, look, all we wanted to do was just follow whatever it is your father said and be obedient unto him. And you got these, other Israelites of our nation that are killing us. They're separating themselves from us, and they're destroying our inheritance for it. Neither have they stretched out their hand against us only, but also against their borders. So he's like, they're not even just attacking us alone, but also all the neighboring cities. And behold, this day they are besieging the tower at Jerusalem to take it. The sanctuary also and Bethsura have they fortified. Wherefore, if thou dost not prevent them quickly, they will do the greater, they will do the greater things than these. Neither shalt thou be able to rule them. So he's saying, look, they're getting out of control. You got to go and stop them, or else it's going to be too late. Now, when the king heard this, he was angry, and gathered together all his friends and the captains of his army and those that had charge of the horse. There came, and this being basically Lysias and Antiochus V, because he was set up as king at this point. But we pretty much know that he's still likely still young, right? Not like a grown ass man at this point, and so Lysias still has that influence over him. There came also unto him from other kingdoms and from isles of the sea bands of hired soldiers. So he gathered a large army and basically mercenaries, so that the number of his army was 100,000 footmen and 20,000 horsemen and 32 elephants exercised in battle. These went through Idumea and pitched against Bethsura, which they assaulted many days, making engines of war. But but they of Bethsura came out and burned them with fire and fought valiantly. So they made those siege engines, those tools for war, but those of Bethsura came and destroyed it, and basically defended and held up against the armies of Antiochus. Upon this, Judas removed from the tower, because they were besieging it, and pitched in Beth Zacharias over against the king's camp. So they came out to war against them, or at least they faced themselves against them. Right, when they pitched, it means they set up their army or their camp over in this region. Then the king, rising very early, marched fiercely with his host toward Beth Zacharias, where his armies made them ready to battle and sounded the trumpets. And to the end they might provoke the elephants to fight, they shewed them the the blood of the grapes and mulberries. So basically, it's kind of like showing a red to a bull and then triggering it. That's what they were doing. They were triggering the elephants. That's how they would get them to be, in a warlike state, and then use them to their advantage during the wars. Moreover, they divided the beasts among the armies, for every elephant they appointed 1,000 men, armed with coats of mail and with helmets of brass on their heads. And beside this, for every beast were ordained 500 horsemen of the best. So this is how they divided the army, right? You would have one elephant, and then you would have all these footmen and these horsemen with them. These were they were like the ancient world tanks. These were ready at every occasion. Wheresoever the beast was, and whithersoever the beast went, they went also, neither departed they from him. And upon the beast were there strong towers of wood, which covered every one of them, and were girt fast onto them with devices. So they basically made shields for them and harnessed it onto them. There were also upon every one 32 strong men that fought upon them, beside the Indian that ruled them. The Indian that ruled them would be the one that is controlling the elephant. And in some other translations, you'll see the numbers is I think 4 or a different number than 32. And because realistically speaking, I mean that's crazy work. You're gonna load up an elephant with 32 strong men, if that's even possible. All right, so might have been a smaller number than that. But it says here, as for the remnant of the horsemen, they set them on this side and that side at the 2 sides of the host, giving them signs what to do, and being harnessed all over amidst the ranks. So they had the elephants, then you would have the additions of the horsemen, or the soldiers on horses on the right side and on the left side. All right, and then some basically guiding and guarding the elephants in what direction to go in, because then they could also use them to ram into the walls or the doors, for strength to try and break it down. Now when the sun shone upon the shields of gold and brass, the mountains glistened therewith, and shined like lamps of fire. So part of the king's army being spread upon the high mountains, and part on the valleys below, they marched on safely and in order. Wherefore all that heard the noise of their multitude, and the marching of the company, and the rattling of the harness, were moved, for the army was very great and mighty. So it's like when you're driving by and you hear people at a concert, and you can just hear that loud sound of a crowd. Except this is war. You're hearing the stomping of the feet, right? You're hearing the sounds of the elephants. You're hearing the shields and the metal and the armor, clinging. Then Judas and his host drew near and entered into battle, and there were slain of the king's army 600 men. Eleazar also, surnamed Savaron, perceiving that one of the beasts armed with royal harness was higher than all the rest, and supposing that the king was upon him, so when he spotted that beast, he thought in his mind, yeah, that must be the one carrying the king, put himself in jeopardy to the end he might deliver his people and get him a perpetual name. So shit, if he can put an end to this battle and, have his name remembered forever by taking out the king, hey, he's going to be, that's going to be a good feat in war. Wherefore he ran upon him courageously through the midst of the battle, slaying on the right hand and on the left, so that they were divided from him on both sides. So as he was going, basically to try and isolate and create a path to get to that elephant where the king was, or at least where he thought the king was, he was just slaying them, the men on the right, the men on the left. Which done, he crept under the elephant and thrust him under and slew him, whereupon the elephant fell down upon him, and there he died. So, he didn't think that part through all the way, because after he killed the elephant from underneath it, but it collapsed downward. It didn't fall to the side, it just collapsed downward, likely because of all the pressure and the weight that was on top of it. So instead of it tilting one direction or another, once it died, and obviously its legs are not being controlled anymore because it's dead, it just collapsed straight down, killing Eleazar in the process. Howbeit the rest of the Jews, seeing the strength of the king and the violence of his forces, turned away from them. So now they started to back up. They started to fall back a bit. Then the king's army went up to Jerusalem to meet them, and the king pitched his tents against Judea and against Mount Zion. So they basically set up camp over there. um, as to besiege it. But with them that were in Bethsura he made peace, for they came out of the city because they had no victuals there to endure the siege, it being a year of rest to the land. So basically, this was the land Sabbath, right? And so they couldn't, because it was that they hadn't planted to get any harvest, to get any crops. So they basically were living off of the store of the previous years. And since they didn't have these victuals, they couldn't endure a siege. They were limited in what they had. So they ended up surrendering or seeking peace. So the king took Bethsura and set a garrison there to keep it. As for the sanctuary, he besieged it many days and set there artilleries with engines and instruments to cast fire and stones and pieces to cast darts and slings. So they made tools or weapons that would, as it says, cast fire and stones, like those fire they look like fireballs, right? Where they coat the stones in some material flammable, and then they launch it. And basically pieces to cast darts and slings, right? Basically tools of like long range weapons or short range or mid range, whatever you want to call it, but things that could shoot projectiles. Whereupon they also made engines against their engines, being Israel, right? They also made tools or war engines. These engines are not talking about like the engine you put in your car. It's just a term used for those kinds of tools and weapons that they use in war. Siege rams, battering rams. You have catapults, right? And held them back a long season. So Israel, those in Jerusalem, were fighting back and holding back the forces of Antiochus. Yet at the last, their vessels being without victuals, for that it was the 7th year, and they in Judea that were delivered from the Gentiles had eaten up the residue of the store. Because similar to the case with Bethsura, they didn't have any new victuals, and eventually they ran out of what they had. There were but a few left in the sanctuary, because the famine did so prevail against them, meaning a few people that were left in the sanctuary, because the famine got so bad that they were fain to disperse themselves, every man to his own place. So they just returned back to their own homes because there was nothing to eat over there. At that time, Lysias heard say that Philip, whom Antiochus the king, whilst he lived, had appointed to bring up his son Antiochus, that is Antiochus the fifth. So Antiochus the fourth, while he was alive, appointed to bring up Antiochus the fifth, his son, that he might be king, was returned out of Persia and Media. So remember, Antiochus on his deathbed, you could say, appointed everything to Philip. When Lysias heard that, he was like, oh no, I gotta go, we gotta return back, and make sure we handle the situation right, or else it's not gonna end well for us. So as it says here, was returned out of Persia and Media, and the king's host also that went with him, and that he sought to take unto him the ruling of the affairs. Wherefore he went in all haste and said to the king and the captains of the host and the company, we decay daily, and our victuals are but small, and the place we lay siege onto is strong, and the affairs of the kingdom lie upon us. So he basically was creating an excuse to say, look, right now it's like a losing battle. These people are ready to withhold all this, and we can't just leave the kingdom unattended. There's still matters we got to take care of. Now, therefore, let us be friends with these men, and make peace with them, and with all their nation, and covenant with them, that they shall live after their laws, as they did before. For they are therefore displeased, and have done all these things because we abolished their laws. So he's saying, look, let's just make a treaty. Let's be cool with them. Let's let them basically go back to doing what they were doing before, following their laws. It's because we came and abolished it, going back to 1 Maccabees 1, that they're doing all this. So the king and the princes were content. Wherefore he sent unto them to make peace, and they accepted thereof. Also the king and the princes made an oath unto them, whereupon they went out of the stronghold. So once they had basically gotten the king's word, they opened up the doors, right? And they came out of the stronghold. Then the king entered into Mount Zion, but when he saw the strength of the place, he broke his oath that he had made and gave commandment to pull down the wall round about. So he said, "Oh, hell no. This might be my only opportunity to actually break through this, break down those walls immediately." Afterward departed he in all haste and returned unto Antiochia. And he did that because likely Lysias was putting a lot of pressure on him, saying, "We got to go." And that's because he feared Philip, because Philip is now coming up on some like the Antiochus put everything in my care, so I'm here to make sure that's okay. So it's now you got this this power struggle. So it says here, he returned in all haste, where he found Philip to be master of the city. So Philip already came there like, "Look, I got the crown, I got the signet. Antiochus put me in charge." And Lysias and the son of Antiochus came back there like, "No, sir, we cannot have that." So he fought against him and he took the city by force. And that brings us to the end of the book of First Maccabees, the 6th chapter. Lord willing, that was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham, Recha Kudash. And until next time, Shalom.